My name's Caitlin Crowley. Good morning to everyone here, and it's really great to be the chair for this session on farming talent, where we'll be exploring the complex and interconnected issues behind Australia's agricultural workforce. How do we attract, train and retain a skilled and capable workforce now and into the future? What does that future workforce look like? But what might be holding the industry back from achieving that? What approaches are working for our farmers right now? Where are the gaps? And how can we nurture the next generation of ag professionals? The challenges and opportunities presented by these questions are significant. ABARES has recruited an expert panel to dissect these issues today, and we want you to be part of that conversation. So remember, questions throughout the session, please submit them to that conference app, and I'll be asking our guest speakers those throughout the conversation. Just a reminder, phones on silent, but please continue this conversation across your social media platforms using hashtag ABARESOutlook. To start this session, it's my pleasure to introduce David Turvey. He's the Executive Director of Jobs and Skills Australia, the organisation tasked by the federal government with undertaking an independent study on the workforce needs of Australia's food supply chain. David will share key insights from that report. At 266 pages, it's no mean feat. Let's give a warm welcome to David.
Good morning. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thanks a lot for having me along today to talk about the work that we've been doing, the report titled An Essential Ingredient, the Food Supply Chain Workforce. Just wanted to start by acknowledging that we're meeting on the lands of the Ngunnawal people today, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are with us today. I actually can't see anybody with that light on, so that's a bit disconcerting if I took my glasses off. Look, what I'll do to just set the scene for this panel discussion is just run you through some of the key insights that we took from this report. It is a long report. It's really hard to write a report about the food supply chain capacity study given how diverse this sector is, even just thinking about the agriculture sector, how diverse that is. So I was trying to think about what the kind of key messages were in this report, and there's just so much in it, it's kind of hard to pull out the key insights. But let me have a crack, if I can figure out how to drive the technology. There we go. So the government asked us to, so Jobs and Skills Australia's role is to provide advice on Australia's current, emerging and future skills needs and how well we think the skills system is set up to meet those needs. And when we talk about the skills system, primarily we talk about higher education, vocational education and migration as three kind of key sources of labour supply. And so when we do a study like this, what we do is we look at like the workforce, what it is, defining it, where it comes from, the factors that influence it, and how labour demand and supply come together to deliver the needs of the industry. So a big part of what we've done in this report and why it's so long is just kind of assembling all the different data sources, which has been quite tricky in itself. We have made 41 recommendations. These recommendations are primarily aimed at government, but some of them require actions from other people, and we're now working with those people to try and make sure those recommendations get implemented. I'll touch on some of those recommendations as we go. But I guess some of the key insights that I wanted to touch on, the variation, the variability and the diversity of the workforce in this sector makes it challenging to analyse and actually come up with policy responses for, because there are so many bespoke needs really. And so finding a kind of a balance between meeting those bespoke needs and kind of the national challenge is tricky. Obviously, the food supply chain is embedded in regional and remote communities, and it's an anchor point for lots of regional communities. And so that means that it's embedded in all those other issues around transport, accommodation, access to early childhood education, and so there's complex interplays between a whole range of other policy spheres. We thought a lot about the importance of attracting the next generation of workers and young people into the sector. And we think that that's really going to require a stronger focus on sort of more formal qualification and training that people will recognise and be able to use throughout their career. And so a lot of what we've done is looked at the way the education and training system is servicing the needs of the sector, and that includes making the sector more diverse and drawing in people from groups that normally wouldn't be that well employed in the sector. I'm thinking about women and First Nations people in particular. We did focus a little bit on the role of the migration system, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And that was a really interesting conversation about the balance between getting the workers in the right place at the right time and protecting their interests and rights, and sort of avoiding unintended consequences. So those are some of the things that we've been thinking about in this report. I'll go through some of the kind of key findings as I go. So everyone loves a good map. We've got lots of maps in the report. We've tried to set the food supply chain out in a couple of different ways. But what this map shows is the location of activity in the food supply chain. And each region in this map's been highlighted where food supply chain is either the largest industry by employment size or in the top three. And I guess what it shows is, it shows the diversity of the sector, I guess, but it also shows the differences in the locations, and particularly it demonstrates the clustering of food production around the processing and distribution sectors as well. And I guess this is one of the things I wanted to kind of highlight here. You guys would all obviously be very familiar with the ag sector stats, particularly the ones that ABARES produces, and how important the ag sector is to the Australian economy in terms of value added, sort of 2.5% of GDP, but 11% of exports, so kind of significant for its trade focus. But traditionally we talk about the agriculture sector as employing in the order of about 300,000 people. When we did this study, we were looking at the whole food supply chain because we wanted to look at the linkages between the different elements of the workforce. And so when you bring together food production, manufacturing, transport and logistics and distribution, you get more like 700,000 people. So there's a really significant workforce, and it's therefore really important that we focus on understanding it better. And a lot of what's in the report, and again why it's so thick, is that we've got lots of data in there about the different occupations that are employed in different subsectors, their geographic distribution, their key workforce demographics, gender, disability, First Nation status, as well as how this is changing over time. And so the idea was to provide a kind of base bedrock of data that can be used to take forward the policy analysis. And we have tried to do some interesting things. Our friends at the NFF put out a press release when we released the report saying it's a shame they didn't solve all the data problems. It is a shame we didn't solve all the data problems, but we've taken them a little bit forward. For example, doing things like this, where we looked at some new data sources. We can get access to things that other people can't get, including single-touch payroll data from the tax office. And so we've been able to analyse the sector in a little bit different way than traditionally. And so you can see what you get out of that kind of analysis, the sort of sheer volatility of some of the sectors in the industry. So this is a chart from the report that shows the workforce in mushroom growing and stone fruit growing. And you can clearly see, obviously, mushroom growing workforce is pretty stable, but the stone fruit growing workforce is really volatile. The important part about this chart is that the data we traditionally use is from the census. The census is where that line is. So that's the data point that's taken. And when the census reports how many people are working in apple and pear growing, it reports 1,500 people. Whereas if you look at the single touch payroll, you get more like 4,200 people. So significantly different consequences by looking at different data sources. So one of the things, and that excludes labour hire and cash in hand and family contributions, so that doesn't even capture the full story. So what we've tried to do is bring together a couple of these different data sources and test them, and we've set all that out in the report. I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about some of the education and training sector insights that we drew out in the report. Obviously, the education and training sector is really critical to making sure that we've got the skills we need for the future of this workforce. But we do think there's some challenges in the sector. Again, one of the innovations that we've been able to bring to this analysis is to look at administrative data, again using tax data as well as activity from the vocational education sector. And we've we've proven that that people who do vocational education qualifications that then move into the ag sector get really good employment outcomes. The basic ag quals, the vet nursing, meat processing quals are amongst the best performing qualifications in the vocational education system. So for example, the Cert 2 in meat processing, 90% of people that do that course are employed after training. And that's well above the national average for vocational education. There are some good examples of work integrated learning, but we think there's greater scope to use more of that type of training. So apprenticeships and traineeships are an area that we think could be better utilised in the sector. And there is some work underway at the moment to develop an apprenticeship pathway for the basic ag quals. And we've also been talking to the sector about using apprenticeships in heavy vehicle driving, and in particular around discrete qualifications around transport for livestock. We think there's probably a greater role for earn while you learn and models like that, but also models that help facilitate movement. Given how volatile the workforce can be, one of the key things is thinking about how to kind of pool resources across businesses and across industries. So group training organisations, for those of you who know what that is, there are organisations that employ people and put them through a training course, but they work with them to get them on the job training. So we think there's greater role for opportunities like that. We're a little bit worried about the role of the higher education system, in particular the post-grad study. The number of PhD commencements is, I think, 40 PhD commencements in the sector 2 years ago, which is a bit of a worry. We're also worried about the thin market. So there's a lot of bespoke training, there's a lot of specialist requirements needed in the sector, but there's a declining number of training providers to actually deliver that training. And in some disciplines, there's only 1 or 2 training providers in the country that actually do the training. And so, like for example, there's a significant concern about veterinarians. There are only 8 vet schools in Australia. So closure of even one of those would be significant for the sector. And we've produced good evidence in the report that shows that the cost of delivering that course is well above what it's currently funded by government. So we've made recommendations about increasing government funding for that course in particular. We also spend a lot of time thinking about the benefits of kind of having regionally place-based education delivery. I mean, getting students into training in the work in the areas that they live and where the work is done can make it much easier for businesses to engage with training providers and get students practical on-the-ground experience. And we know that regional education providers can act as sort of anchor institutions. And so that's why one of the recommendations was to boost the focus on the regional university study hub program, to broaden that out to cover vocational education and facilitate regional-based training. There's other insights here we can come back to during the panel. I did want to spend a few minutes talking about the migration story. We were specifically asked by the government in this study to look at the role of the Working Holiday Maker scheme. This was fun. I chaired the steering committee for this project, which was a tripartite steering committee, and so we had some very robust discussions around the need for having the right workers in the right place at the right time to meet the needs of the industry versus the fragility and potential vulnerability of certain groups of workers. And so the reports made some recommendations which I've been told are a little bit wishy-washy. It was one of those cases where that was the best we could do in terms of getting the stakeholders to agree to a particular position. But essentially what we found in relation to the Working Holiday Maker scheme is that it does play a critical role, but it is open to vulnerability and exploitation, and we need to be careful about protecting workers. We also think that there's just a complex interplay here between the Working Holiday Maker scheme, the PALM scheme, employer-sponsored temporary skilled migration, the permanent migration scheme. There's lots of different policy instruments. There's the specified work requirements. There's the requirements to only work with a particular employer. It's all a bit too complex, I think, is the conclusion I came to. And so we've made some recommendations about how we can help streamline, including targeted migration pathways that are particularly, the Hort sector is a key one where we think there's a case for something special. We think there's probably a case for allowing some palm workers to choose to move because working with the one employer the whole time is potentially problematic. We think there might be a case for registering employers for the Working Holiday Maker scheme, although again that was controversial. Even simple things like the English language requirements, they're different across different visa categories. So there's work we can do to help tighten that up. And there was a really interesting discussion around the role of accommodation and things like hostels who end up acting like labour hire employment brokers in some regions. One thing that we don't know very much about is the role of labour hire. That's a key data gap, and that's something we need to learn more about. But I'd like to know more about the interplay between labour hire firms and accommodation providers. So then to just go on to, again, I'm not pushing this button hard enough. There we go. In terms of data, because we love data and you guys love data too, as I said, we did some interesting and novel things in this report. We looked at the payroll job ads data. We looked at some visa processing data from Home Affairs. We looked at our own analysis using tax records of how people move between occupations. And we've looked at the outcomes from training using our linked administrative data. So we think we've made a contribution, but we think there's a fair way to go. There's some key issues around the fact that some of the ABS business surveys just don't cover agriculture because of international standards. A lot of the data we use to look at demand for labour comes from job ads. Firms just don't use job ads in the agriculture sector. That's not how people hire. So there's a number of major data gaps that we think still need to be finished, filled in. But we do think there's a lot of scope to draw in and link up some of these new data sources. And so we did make a recommendation, which I know Vincent's very excited about, on having a new workforce unit in ABARES to take forward this data analysis work. So finally, I think that's my end of my slides. I just wanted to spend a few minutes at the end. Probably shouldn't have done that. Sorry, now I've broken it. Let's just leave it at that. What I wanted to just finish off by saying, we did make a recommendation in the report about a vision for the agriculture sector. We think there's a case for getting all of the relevant parties in the industry, the sector, to come together and kind of be clear about what we're trying to achieve when we think about workforce planning for the sector. And we put forward some potential suggestions about what a vision could achieve, including promoting safe work, building a sustainable, resilient workforce, making the workforce more inclusive, bringing in more people that traditionally might be disadvantaged, driving productivity growth and being innovative, but also having quality jobs and somewhat controversially actually becoming an employer of choice. So we think there's a case for taking that forward, and the Jobs and Skills Council, Skills Insight, has taken responsibility for doing that. So I guess I just wanted to kind of finish before I get told to get off the stage with the kind of summary that it's actually really hard to summarise this report because there's so much in it. The sector is so diverse and so complex. But that means that we need to kind of even work harder to come up with a combination of workforce strategies that are both bespoke and fit for purpose, but also kind of scalable and have a broad impact across the sector. We think that all the elements of the national skills system, vocational education, higher education, migration, all need to be working well together to deliver the needs of the workforce. And we need to be really open to new approaches, trialling new things, thinking about new qualifications or new pathways. But I think the most important thing is, and given the importance of the ag sector and food supply chain in regional labour markets, we really need to make sure that we've got all the parties at the table to come up with strategies that work for the sector. So I will leave it there and hand you back to our panel chair.
Thanks very much, David. You have really laid the groundwork for our panellists to dig deeper into some of these really significant challenges. Capturing that impactful data, the role of higher education and training providers and where they're based, the migration piece, and just the diversity of the workforce that we need in agriculture. So when we think about that vision for a future ag workforce, we wanted to share with you a piece of content which reimagines how agriculture is represented, challenges some outdated perceptions, presenting careers in ag as part of a vibrant, thriving sector, a true growth industry. We'll play that video for you now, and then I'll bring in our panellists to start today's discussion. So watching that, I think we can all agree we do have so much to be proud of and excited for. Now, I'd like to invite our panellists to make their way to the stage. And so we have Jennifer Galloway, Mick Fuller, Ruth Nettle, and Richard Shannon, if you guys want to come on up as I introduce you. So we have Jennifer Galloway. She's the Manager of Workforce Communications and Adoption at AgriFutures Australia, where she's spearheading programs to build workforce capacity, support leadership development, and foster collaboration across the agricultural sector. Welcome, Jennifer. Our next panellist is Mick Fuller. He's the National People Lead for Dairy Australia with more than 25 years experience as a people and culture professional and dairy farming in his DNA, growing up on a dairy farm in South Gippsland. Good morning to you, Mick. Caitlin, that's my chair.
I know, that's my fault.
Welcome to Professor Ruth Nettle from the School of Agriculture, Food and Ecosystem Sciences at the University of Melbourne. Don't sit in my chair.
I thought you said you were in the middle.
Whose core study areas align directly with the conversation we're having today around the attraction and retention of the rural workforce. And we have Richard Shannon joining us online thanks to Cyclone Alfred. He's the Executive Officer of the National Farmers Federation Horticulture Council, describes himself as a recovering public servant, with more than a decade as a policy professional working across agriculture, trade, biosecurity, renewable energy, healthcare innovation and Indigenous education. We're so glad you could still be with us, Richard. I mean, I can sit in the middle, sure. They're really giving me a hard time this morning, these panellists. Yeah, but I do love a bit of change. So I might start with you, Jennifer. Watching that piece of content there, how does that align with the vision for the future workforce that you have in mind, or where you think we need to head on this?
It's a really interesting question because I think we've been having this conversation for a long time. I've been in the industry for nearly 5 years, and we had Evoke Ag, the AgriFutures Evoke Ag, 2 weeks ago in Brisbane, and that sentiment was so loudly echoed throughout a lot of the sessions that we went along to, was about how do we change the perception of what careers in ag look like. At the end of 2022, there was a report released, Community Perceptions Work Year Experience report that was released, and what was really clear is that ag's just not even on the radar for those looking for careers, for job seekers. And I did a little desktop yesterday, had a look on Seek. There are 4,000 jobs in, currently, there are over 4,000 jobs in agriculture. There are 150 jobs available from a fisheries perspective and over 400 jobs available from a forestry perspective, 700, sorry. So the opportunities are out there. However, we know that we've got really low brand awareness as a sector. We know that there's lots of misconceptions. So we've got to do some myth busting around that, and that's what that video is really, a manifesto of what it could look like. Imagine if that was what the world saw when they were thinking about jobs in agriculture. People think it's really physical. They think you have to be in the regions. We've still got those traditional images of, and no offence, but the white, male, middle-aged farmer with the rusty gate. We don't see Barangaroo with an office overlooking Sydney Harbour where you could be working if you worked in ag. That's not where I'm based, by the way. I'm in Wagga and I cannot see Barangaroo. But it doesn't align to careers with a purpose, which is surprising given what we know because we're in the industry, how purposeful our sector is. And we know that's a really key driver of attraction. I think the other big thing is you can't be what you can't see. And currently, we can't see those jobs. We can't see the jobs of the future, and we know what those future jobs are. We can't see that when we represent agriculture. So we really need to change that.
Yeah, and I'm so interested, Mick, in your thoughts on that video and potential limitations of that video as well, and any reflections you have having a listen to David's presentation this morning, what that story looks like in dairy right now?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. One, to address the workforce of the future, we firstly need to address the workforce of today. And dairy's workforce needs are quite acute, as they are in many entities in agriculture. It's frequently the top 2 or 3 challenges that our farmers actually have. So we need to address that, and we are addressing that through really promoting and marketing and repositioning our employment value proposition. And our employment value proposition is strong around images of working outdoors, working with animals, being autonomous, working in a team or by yourself, and great purpose in terms of producing food that feeds the nation, feeds the world. With respect to Jen's video, she is right. It's really good, and I think that's an angle that ag needs to take in terms of higher tech roles. I guess the limitation when I look at dairying is those roles exist, but there's fewer of those roles. The base of the roles in dairy is actually on the farm that involves tech, but also involves a lot of just fundamental understanding and work with animals and quite frankly, sort of hard work. So I think in selling the future in dairy, we need to be careful that we don't oversell roles for which there aren't many of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be coming back to you a little later with some of the insights you were able to get out of your workforce survey last year. I think, the work that dairy has done in that space can give us a lot of insights. But I'll go to you now, Ruth. How did you feel watching that video in light of the work that you're doing and the insights you've gained from researching this issue of attracting and retaining a workforce? And I know you have some slides to share with people as well.
Yeah, sure, thank you. I think probably not trying to channel Prue Gordon too much. But
please do. I loved it.
Yes.
I loved it.
So those of you that were here at the session yesterday, I suppose you have to recognise that currently we are globally in a shortage of labour and skills in the OECD countries. And that has been a strong shortage and an intensifying shortage for all sorts of reasons, ageing demographics of OECD country populations, all sorts of reasons, but we're really in still sort of that crisis, or what's often called a war for talent. But that could change, and it could change relatively rapidly, depending on what unfolds, because we know that any shock in the global markets comes down to the farm, or comes down to the workforce. And I suppose one of my concerns just emerging over the last few weeks is I've seen over many decades how the agricultural workforce is part of the boom and bust cycle. I've seen areas, particularly around the mining boom, for instance, that we had attraction programs that were effective, and then nearly overnight, because of the mining sector coming off, employers, farm employers saying, oh, actually we don't need a workforce anymore, so we'll just deal with what we have. And so I suppose my concern overall is that we have to keep the long game. Yes, it is a current workforce issue is absolutely central, but if we're true to the title of this session being about sustainable ag workforce, I still don't quite understand that, but we need to be thinking long term, and we could well be coming for a big shock around what workforce we might need in agriculture, and how that might change because of the global shocks. So I think we do have to live up to the story we're trying to tell, but we have to really show that on the ground, and even in crisis. And so this is where I think it's a real balance between what the individual farmer or business owner requires and how they strategise and plan their workforce relative to what the community, government, industry can provide to help that sustainability piece, to help that we live up to the reputation that we're trying to build, such as how the video portrays. And to try to move out from the boom and bust thinking in our workforce, because of some of the reasons that have been mentioned, because workforce is not just another resource like land, labour and capital, and when we keep trying to treat it as such, we don't compete in the global war for talent. So that does come to some of my slides, Caitlin, but I'm not sure if you wanted to move on first, because I'll come back where we talked to Australian producers about what they were doing around people management and people management practices and attracting and retaining a workforce. And I think that's a strategic piece, and I could share some of the results of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we might go to Richard now, and then we'll come back to that. So, Richard, your perspective, NFF lens, any reflections on David's presentation this morning, and just where we're at in terms of actually getting more of a consensus on what a future workforce looks like?
Thanks, Caitlin. And yes, Dave did mention that we might have made some sort of reflection soon after the report came out that we might have liked more data. That's always true, and that's, I guess, come through in the recommendations that the JSA has made about, investing in that data through ABARES, which I'm sure many in the audience today would be welcoming. I think data and more evidence is really important here. There is a bit of an interplay between trust and truth. The current government has been really deliberate in bringing unions, government and industry together in a tripartite way to help solve some of these issues. And we have been able to build those relationships and agree on a number of things. Where push has come to shove, though, we have sort of tended to withdraw back into our traditional corners. And that is where truth is so important. We can get so far with trust. Ultimately, though, we need some facts. At the moment, we're sort of withdrawing and relying on each party relying on alternative facts. If we're going to be more prescriptive with some of our policy responses to our workforce needs, we need more facts, more truth. Really welcoming recommendations by JSA to invest in that. It's essential if we are going to be more prescriptive and more targeted. Welcome recommendations made by JSA around a targeted migration pathway, particularly for horticulture. This has been called an Australian agriculture visa historically. whatever you want to call it, that's something that industry is still interested in pursuing. At the moment, we have a working holidaymaker scheme, which is often called a program of cultural exchange. The PALM program, while was definitely designed to meet workforce shortages, it's also an important tool of diplomacy and geopolitical influence. So as a primary purpose, it's not necessarily fulfilling our workforce needs. We feel there's a clear need for a migration pathway that is specifically designed to meet the needs of the Australian agriculture industry, and glad that that's come through in this particular study.
Thank you very much, and hopefully we can find a way to bump up Richard's volume for the next one, because it is a little bit tricky to hear you right now, but thank you for those insights, and we'll definitely come to the migration complexity and structure a little later in the chat. But it might be nice now, Ruth, if you wanted to show us some of that research that you have, and we can dig into those results, and particularly around how something like employer of choice is actually landing. David mentioned earlier the need for that, but yeah, we're really keen to have a look at your research.
Great, thank you. So I'm just part of a team that AgriFutures has been doing a lot in the area to take on projects and work around the workforce area. And one of those is to look at what does employer of choice mean for people on the ground? Is this something that people could coalesce around? And what would that look like? So I just wanted to show some of the things that have been coming through there. But as I talk about individual producers and sort of their practices, I suppose I'm really trying to emphasise that this is strategic work. This is about really engaging with understanding there are global skills and labour shortages, and agriculture needs to better tell the story, but also improve practices, what best practice sort of looks like, and be able to communicate that in a collective way. And so what I always sort of think is that there's a lot of diversity in the workforce, there's a lot of perhaps competing interests, but the area of people's experience in work is something that we can build a vision around, and that is something that can be shared. So one of the key findings from some insights that we gathered from 160 interviews and surveys with producers all over Australia from lots of different sectors is that this is an area that is in common. This is an area about how we improve the experience, the employee value proposition, the practices that we're doing, the experience that people have. Whether you're an oyster farmer or a tropical fruit grower or a beef producer or a grain grower, these common interest and common desire and aspiration to do better in this area was common across everything. So if there is one thing you can agree on, if you can't, around workforce needs and visa schemes, etc., it is this area. So we'll go to the next slide, just to give a bit of a summary. So as I said, we conducted 161 consultations and surveys, a bit of a combination across Australia. We definitely spoke to probably what you could say is the people that are leading in this area, because of course they'd be the ones that would want to talk to us and want to share what they're doing. So I recognise that that's the perspective that this work is bringing. As I mentioned, we found a lot of commonality across all these sectors. And we found that making a positive workplace culture was the most common theme through all of those consultations. So the common things that we hear, though, is, well, don't the corporate or larger farms do better at this because they've got this big back office and they have all the procedures and the compliance and things like that? What we definitely found was that the larger businesses across all the sectors tend to do a lot more HR practices or people management practices. So in attraction, they would have wider scope for attracting a workforce. They would have clearer recruitment and selection criteria. They might do a lot more around career development. So there was more practices, but what was really interesting was that there was no difference in attitudes to the importance of people management, whether they were small or large farms. So it really showed that for the small to medium-sized operations, it's those resources, it's people doing those multiple roles. They're the head of HR and they're the head of the herd manager. So it really shows that the support that can be provided around helping those businesses in their positive workplace culture is what's needed. It's not that there is any different attitude to the importance of people management. We also, and there was a significant difference there. In terms of what we found in terms of employee training and development, we found that when farm employers valued training for themselves, whether that was going to a pasture course or going to a people management course, if they valued training for themselves, they were more likely to also value it for their employees and have their employees involved in lots of different industry things and training. So a very tight relationship there. So that's why you might see a difference in the demand for training. We definitely got the clear message as we spoke to people about their experiences in people management, that this was a learnt skill and it was one through experience. It was a continuous improvement story. It wasn't a set and forget, oh, we're best practice employers now. It was something that was always being worked on. It was something that was grown. And it was something that then creates a great environment for learning across sectors, for instance. And when it came to being an employer of choice, there was a big difference here. So 60% of who we spoke to said, yeah, that absolutely resonates with me. Yes, that's what I'm trying to achieve, and I'm always trying to achieve and get there. But for many others, they said, that term doesn't resonate with me, but what does is that I want to be a respected employer. I want to create that environment for people to thrive and flourish. So if we go to the next slide, just a couple of quotes here from people. Here's just some results around the importance of positive workplace culture by the majority of people that we spoke to, but also a lot of other practices that people were putting in place to improve that work environment. So things like the flexible work development opportunities, but around that culture at the on farm. And the next slide, I suppose, brings out the way people spoke to us about the importance of this area for everything in their business and their farm, and how they were people-oriented, trying to create that atmosphere at work around a positive experience. So if I just go to the next slide, this idea about being proud in the experience that people are having came through a lot more strongly than the idea of a brand. And so that's something about how the industry collectively could tell a story, and there's some listed practices there. But there'll be a full report here from everything that these producers were doing. So just to conclude from my perspective, Caitlin, if we go to the next slide, just something about there was still not a lot, although there's lots of training, there was sort of not. So this wasn't something that people really had a lot of access to necessarily. They got a lot from their industry, but still only half of the people we spoke to had really put more formality into this role. So in terms of where to or the way forward, in the next slide, sorry, I know you're giving me the controller there. So I think in terms of future workforce strategy, if we think of the strategic importance of this area in competing around global labour skills and labour shortages, yes, a best practice framework in people management is going to be important. but it's supporting people around the aspiration there and that self-leadership when it comes to this area. We saw that a lot of people, the need to promote the benefits of seeking resources. So there's lots of resources. You know, Dairy Australia has this fantastic website that everybody pinches things, but it's about the why I should go there, why I need to be doing better here is more important, not just having the resources. The signposting needs to be clearer. And the farmer-to-farmer peer learning cross sectors, I think, is an area that could be focused on. And I think getting back to the video, I suppose, Caitlin, that telling the story of the people-focused workplaces is part of the attraction story, and that reduces turnover and that reduces that demand for more and more approaches. So I think this is all tied up in the strategies overall that David talked about. In terms of young people, I just want to give a call out that we are doing research around young people and why they're attracted, retained and developed in the ag sector. So if you're from Victoria and you know a young person, make sure you click on that QR code.
Excellent. And I'll go to you now, Mick. Your insights from the workplace survey, how do they align, or what's different from what's come out of Ruth's research? What are you seeing in dairy?
Oh, much of the same, and quite aligned with David's earlier report as well. So within dairy, we survey quite a lot, and our key people survey is the Power of People survey, which we run every 3 years. It's a large survey. It involves 400 farms, large, medium, small, and representing each of our 8 dairy regions. To David's point, he illustrated that there is a point in time, and you know what is relevant now. Will that be relevant in 2 years' time or 1 year's time? That is definitely a consideration, which is why we also use some other internal data and some external data to help validate that. But we work on the basis that you know, the old adage, what you don't measure is very difficult to manage, and it helps us really inform the programs that we have afoot, or the programs and strategies that we're actually looking at. So an example is we've just finished a 3-year workforce project, a workforce attraction project, and the survey last year was really important to see, well, how successful have we been with regards to addressing, you know, those key farmer needs in the areas of ease of recruitment, in the areas of retention, development of staff, and you know, some stats sort of straight off the top. Our farmers still find recruitment challenging, but less challenging than 2 years ago. And that's evidence, one, because they're telling us that's the case, but two, the time taken to recruit has reduced fairly considerably over the last 2 years in particular. With regards to retaining staff, we have nearly 4,000 farms across our 8 regions that employs 17,000 permanent employees, or close to 25,000 when we include casual employees. And the turnover rate we have found is surprisingly better than we thought. It runs at around 10%, excluding casuals, and there is an important asterisk there, because if we were to include casuals, of course it would be higher. But I suppose an important stat coming out of that, nearly 70% of the turnover that farms do incur occurs within that first 12 months of employment. And so that helps us in terms of future programs, saying, okay, so if we can get our people through that first year of employment, there's a very good chance that they could be 5-year, 10-year employees. But that first year of employment, and maybe that's not a surprise to anyone here, but I guess it helps to have it validated by the data, because that's where we're now concentrating on how can we create a better fit, you know, in terms of, you know, what we've just heard about before. How can we create, you know, strong leadership and a good culture that people actually have a good employment experience that makes them want to stay.
Absolutely. And I want to go to you now, Jen, for your thoughts on something David mentioned when we were thinking about our training providers and the regionality of that. How can we use our regional areas? It made me sort of think of plenty of stories I've done around the need to train GPs and health professionals in rural areas because there's much higher % chance that they will actually want to stay or continue work in a regional area. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm a city girl who moved to the country, so I'm an example of somebody who didn't ever consider ag, who just knew where eggs were bought at the shop, chickens were bought at the shop. I'd never been on a farm, and I moved for love to the country.
Another proven strategy.
Yeah, it's a great strategy. I mean, look at Farmer Wants a Wife. But I do think it's a whole of systems approach, really, then, isn't it? Because when you look at moving to the regions, and we talk about changing the perceptions of working in ag, not to be just regionally based, but that's where a lot of the jobs are, right? So there is still, we need to have a look at what it means to move to the regions and what the systems and schools and livability and all of that stuff is so important, especially if you're uprooting your life and moving to another place. The cultural differences, the social differences, the jobs that are available for partners, the schools that are available for your children, the universities, all of the foundations around that regional living. And there's been lots of programs that have been put in place that have been quite successful around, especially in the health space, around how they do get doctors to consider moving to the regions and then what support systems are set up for them when they move there. It's probably something we could do, and I love that both, looking at both the programs from dairy and the employer of choice, how that first year is such an important part and what we could do in that first year and how we set up those foundations. So I think it's about that whole of systems approach that we come together to make sure people really have a great experience, because they're likely to say, but they're also likely to tell their friends.
Yeah, and thinking about my hometown of Toowoomba, this is an area where ag certainly doesn't have to go it alone, because we do have local economic development groups and things like that that go out there and showcase the livability of the region, have those things ready to welcome them. So yeah, I think it's that thing, that aspect too of a team,
Yes.
that you can, think of it from a regional approach, and how can we lean into some of these like regional study hubs. David, did you have anything to add there around how much training actually is happening in our regions?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's lots of good evidence around the training activity that's going on. I think, for the sector in particular, the decline in the number of training providers in rural areas is a problem. And there's this interesting kind of story about the role of TAFEs versus private providers, where you tend to find TAFEs tend to locate in larger centres, and the small specialist providers tend to be in more remote areas. I guess one of the key things, and I love your point about the system and getting everybody to work together. There's stories around training providers sharing facilities, employers working together to train a workforce for the industry, and employers working with the education training sector as well to make sure that they're teaching what's actually needed in the jobs. So taking that kind of regional approach, doing it kind of collectively, and it sort of helps deal with Ruth's point about the volatility. If you can kind of train a workforce that's flexible to move across different types of jobs, to utilise the core skills that people have when they do a particular qualification or have a particular work experience, it just makes the region more stable. And so one of the things we highlight in the report is some of those regions that are really diverse versus ones where they're really specified and narrow, and what can be done about that.
Yeah, and I'll go to you here, Richard, again around the role that our regions can play in the migration story. So to use Toowoomba again as an example, we're a refugee welcome zone. We have all kinds of cultural groups that have found a home and ag careers on the Darling Downs, including, and I'd have to go and have a look at the numbers, but talk of some Ukrainian refugees who have that background in grain production as well, coming to help with our broadacre ag. What's your take on the region's role in welcoming and actually helping support when we do have our workers coming in for ag?
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin. How's my audio?
Much better. Yeah.
Great. Hugely important.
Bad.
The role of
It was good for a second.
It was really good. Try again.
Okay. No, migration is hugely important for agriculture and obviously horticulture as well. Thinking of horticulture, it is provided. It's been an industry in Australia, I think, that's provided a step up for new migrants into Australia. If you look back through Australian history, starting with Chinese migrants initially and market gardens through a lot of regional and rural Australia, through Southern European migrants after World War II, and more recently migrants from Southeast Asia. If you were to go to a wholesale market in any capital city, you would see all of those sort of nationalities and migrants engaged in horticulture now for many generations. But continuing today, we are reliant on migrants for our seasonal workforce. These things are really important. The Everything video, Ruth's work around creating a really positive workplace culture. Our number one priority is attracting and retaining Australians in our industry, including in those seasonal roles. However, it hasn't been the case for a long time that we could rely on Australians to fulfil our workforce needs, to get food out of fields and onto the kitchen tables around Australia. So it is essential, and we continue to look for ways to make migration simpler and easier. There is an accessibility question, I think, in terms of being able to access some of the government programs that enable migration, and particularly the PALM scheme. That's something that we continue to advocate for, is making that more streamlined, and that's something that certainly the JSA report calls out, because we're finding increasingly that small and medium-sized employers are being unable to engage with that scheme because of the administrative complexity. We need to make it so much more simple. I think everyone would agree that ideally we have direct employment relationships between a small business and their worker, and we should design programs in a way to promote that. And at the moment we're heading in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and I did want to give you the opportunity to unpack what's been happening with the PALM scheme a little more, in light you wrote an opinion piece quite recently saying that the value proposition of PALM workers has eroded. What is happening on the ground? What are you hearing from your members, and why is it no longer serving growers, in your opinion?
Yeah, so the PALM scheme existed in a couple of different forms before COVID and rapidly expanded because backpackers were told by the then Prime Minister to go home. We wouldn't look after you. And so, the PALM scheme rapidly expanded. And it went from a program where often there were sort of long-standing direct relationships between workers and employers that even went back to, an employer in a particular village in the Pacific Nation. Really close relationships, and as a result, there was great productivity that employers, found in using that scheme. Moving forward with the rapid expansion of PALM and the fact that there were so few workers in the country, these PALM workers, unfortunately, were sort of a rare asset, and as a result, too often they were being lured away from their approved employer, who they were placed with in Australia, and were picking up other jobs outside of the program. We call this disengagement or absconding, and that's been on the rise as the scheme has expanded, unfortunately. It's going to take a little while to put that cat back in the bag, unfortunately, and it comes back to culture and norms of workers and employers in the sector to help correct that trend.
Yeah, thanks for those insights. We have some great questions coming through, and I'd like to try and whip through as many as I can because we are under the time pressure. Elephant in the room is the reputation damage of bad employers driving away potential workers. How do we address this once and for all? We spoke a little bit about outliers in our previous session. Is there perhaps, I might go to you, Mick, do you have any thoughts on this one?
We're more about promoting good employment practice than calling out bad. We don't have ownership of the end-to-end process with regards to their individual employers. So I think as an industry, we're better off framing what good really looks like, and under that guise, and Ruth, to your point of employer of choice as a banner, I agree with you. I think if farmers in general, quite modest. They don't want to be known necessarily as the employer of choice. It's a foreign term to them, but they want to be respected as employers, and so maybe that's a better term to actually use. And I think if we framed what good looked like, and as a sector we were able to provide farmers with the tools to actually become good, then the incidence of poor employment would diminish. And I think there's always enforcement with authorities outside of that to actually weed out those those minority poor employers.
Yeah, thank you. We have a question that's come through online from Rachel Chambers, who's the CEO of Queensland Fruit and Vegetable Growers, and I want to read this one out in full. We've loved this report highlighting some of the data issues horticulture continually struggles with when bad data is used for decision making. We truly need to work together more on this. We've been previously told that due to the complexity of workforce in horticulture, resources cannot be adequately attributed to its solution. How long are we going to keep using this as an excuse to do very little? Noting also that 98% of hort is domestic only, so has a whole range of data and info that doesn't get picked up in ABARES stats and decision making. Do you have a take on that, David?
Thank you. Appreciate the question. Look, I mean, we spent 9 months with a team of about 6 people focused on, well, not just hort obviously, but the whole food supply chain, and got as far as we did with a 266-page report. So I think we've made some steps forward. I think we've demonstrated the ability to use some non-traditional data sources to try and capture stuff that's collected anyway, so it doesn't create a new burden on people to have to fill in more surveys. And I think we've pointed to some future work that could be done to really try and take the whole thing a lot further forward. And so that's what we recommended in our report. Obviously, it's up to government to make decisions about allocating resources to ABARES or elsewhere to do that. But I think there is a lot more we can do with existing data and kind of modern analytic techniques that hasn't been done before.
I'll open this question to any panellist. Does the federal government need to be doing more in this space, in the ag workforce space? Are current measures enough? Does anyone have an opinion on that, or what you'd like to see happening?
I have 41 recommendations in the report.
And I guess, and I guess we have to wait and see what's adopted and how that plays out. Perhaps that the detail moving forward. It's a bit of a waiting game.
As I said, the Skills Insight, the Jobs and Skills Council, has already committed to take forward a number of those recommendations. There are others that are for government, which obviously need to go through government decision-making processes. But I think my sense is that there was a fair bit of goodwill around taking this stuff forward, and we'll be tracking it.
Yeah, the question I had for Richard was if there was one policy lever or setting to improve the current situation for you, what would it be that you could change?
Good question. Can I answer the last question first?
Absolutely.
I mean, there is more the government can do. Unfortunately, there have been a couple of decisions more recently from government that has withdrawn investment in solving some of these challenges. The Harvest Trail Services is a program that ran for over 20 years, and it helped employers in regional areas find workers and help workers find employers. Hugely important service, including the jobs board that made that market work more efficiently. That funding was ceased reasonably recently, and also Fair Farms. It's a program led by industry, designed to educate and improve and promote better employment practice across the industry. That's witnessed a reduction of its funding, the funding that we would need to remain viable and sustainable into the future. So, there's only been examples of with lessening investment and not more at this point. So, we'd like to see that turn around, obviously. And in terms of just one setting, I'll go back to the visa, the Australian Agriculture Visa. We were arguing for this before COVID. Finding the right people in the right place in the right time was exceptionally hard then, when 80% of our workforce, our seasonal workforce, were backpackers. the argument for the visa remains. As I mentioned earlier, it fits a neat gap at the moment where we have working holiday makers that can meet a surge need when we need it, at a peak of harvest and a baseline of farm workers. And agriculture visa would complement those two programs really neatly in our view.
Thank you. I wanted to pick up on a report that NFF put out in the lead up to the study actually being done, which went into how they felt about developing this vision, a vision for the future of agriculture. And I liked this comment that said, "We seriously doubt the prospects of a vision which is handed to farmers by government, which has not been developed organically from the grassroots. At the very least, any vision will need to position the farm at its centre. While it is desirable and admirable for other groups, community, union, government to buy in, any vision must principally be designed and cared for by industry." I'm interested from all of your perspective, like how are we going on that? You know, how are you seeing that vision being built and perpetuated by industry right now? I might start with you, Richard, and then I really like to whip through everyone on this.
Yeah, I think there's lots of different pieces that are leading to this. It's certainly a recommendation we've made again through the JSA study. It's a recommendation that JSA has then made for Skills Insight to lead that work, and we're really supportive of it. We want to contribute to it. I think it's true. It's so important, the story we tell ourselves about who we are as employers. We need to start there and make sure we believe it, and then we're going to have all the other external stakeholders that are so important, including prospective workers. They're going to believe it as well. So yeah, we're ready for that conversation to build that vision, some principles. That's only going to get us so far. Again, coming back to my original comments around facts and truth. You know, a vision and common agreed principles are going to get us a long way down the road, but unless we've got some truth to fall back on, that's probably not going to get us all the way to where we need to go.
Yeah, what are your thoughts, Mick?
Yeah, I would agree. You know, farmers need to be the centre of any vision that's developed. I've been working at Dairy Australia for 2 years now, and there's one thing I do know, and that farmers listen to farmers. So you can be the smartest person in the room, but it is farmers will listen to farmers. When they see something work on another person's farm, they are much more likely to pick it up. And maybe on a larger level, you know, farmers can only really embrace a vision if farmers are actually involved centrally in developing that.
Yeah, Jen?
Yeah, probably to that. I mean, I love David's sentiment at the beginning, talking about the vision and getting all the right people on the table. You know, currently we undertook a study of the workforce projects that are happening at the moment, and there are over 140 of them. And, you know, from a vision perspective, if we were all working towards the same vision, then we would probably find that duplication of effort would reduce significantly because we wouldn't all be working in silos. So I think that we're really supportive of what's coming out of that report.
Yeah, what are your thoughts, Ruth?
Yeah, I think we do need to look at the global scene and internationally as well. So I'm part of an association called the International Association for Work in Agriculture. And so there you can share with researchers and farmers and policy, talking about doing better overall in this area. So we talk about decent work, we talk about job quality, we talk about women on farms, children on farms, safety. So I think it's being part of the global conversation as well. I think we need more voices from employees and the experiences that they have into a vision. Because while I do agree the farm to be at the centre here, we have to realise, though, that it's like the discussion we had on social acceptance and trust, that there's a big component of where society's heading around work and expectations that we need to bring in as well, and not just be listening to our own bubble of voices.
Yeah, so a lot of challenges, and similar to what we heard yesterday, we can be facing these huge challenges, but we have agency and we have so many tools at our disposal to unpack. I thought I might just do a last final observation, whip around call to action. What's your message, David, to everyone here today?
Yeah, and look, I mean, just to kind of answer the last question about vision, I mean, it might be a bit of a squib, but we deliberately didn't set a vision statement in our report because that would be like we're a government agency telling the sector. But we tried to set out what we thought were some principles based on the engagement that we did for the study, which was tripartite and pretty deep. But I think that's really critical, and I completely take your point, Ruth, about employers have to be at the centre of it, but the other side of the labour market is the people that do the jobs. So they've both got to be at the table and both part of that story, supported by the education and training system, the migration system, and government as well. So getting all those parties together and getting everyone working in the same direction is critical.
Final thought? Call to action?
Yeah. I think to focus on the core of the relationship, which is mutuality. So that's the call to action, to keep that always in mind, and that we can do more together. That's where efficiency and effectiveness can come off. And have that bigger picture, that global picture as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Jen?
I was reflecting on what we've heard over the last day and a half, and there's been a lot of talk around data and the importance of evidence decision making and collaboration. So I think my final thoughts are, if we just keep working in silos, we're never going to be able to shift the dial. So we actually need to come together and get, as you said, we have to get the right people at the table.
Collaboration.
Yeah, it's key.
Yeah, and my word was going to be collaboration too. I think we are stronger together. I think that needs to be balanced with a practicality that there is still competition for workforce within the ag sector. So we need to be able to be identifying what are the non-competitive areas that we would be absolutely be better collaborating on. And 140 live projects tells me that there's great scope for that, while still being able to cater for the particular needs of an entity. You asked an earlier question with regards to if I could ask government, given that we're in Canberra, we could do that. What would we like from government? I think the two areas that immediately come to mind is the visas and making that program easier. There's a realisation that there is a sector of the Australian workforce that are just not willing to do the sorts of work that we have on our farms, and we are becoming more and more reliant on our international workforce. I think the second point, and again, if I had the answer to that, maybe I'd be spending more time in Canberra. A huge barrier to employment regionally is a lack of accommodation, and anything that a state or federal government can do to alleviate supply of accommodation would be a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll finish with you, Richard.
Thanks. I guess my main takeaway would be steady the ship, or the main message. There's been a huge amount of disruption in horticulture, particularly through COVID, and then changes to the palm scheme and its settings that employers have had to adapt to, and questions that the current government have raised through a review of migration settings around the future of the working holiday maker program and the specified work component. That has created an amount of uncertainty and stress in our industry. If we're going to come back with some solutions, I think we need to do our homework first. But in the meantime, steady the ship, create a period of calm, allow employers to adjust to the current scenario, and for that to settle down a bit before we move forward with more changes to our workforce.
Absolutely. Well, in the war for talent, if we can all leave here ready to steady the ship, I think that'll be a great thing. Let's give a big thank you to our panellists. You've been fantastic.